Hello, 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 everybody. You are in the right place at the right time. You know why? Because you're joining our policy hour, first hour, and the second hour, Ask a Lawyer. And so bring your questions, your feedback. We would love to hear from you. This is National Parents Union, as you can see. I am Christina Laster, the Director of Policy and Legislation here with the National Parents Union, and joining me are some amazing people. We are so delighted to be able to bring to you every third Tuesday of the month our policy hour session where you get to hear about policy legislation, politics, governance structures, all that nerdy, wonky type of stuff. We're going to break it down so that you can understand and know your rights. And so we're here every third Tuesday of the month. And then the second hour, stay tuned. Bring your questions there too, because we will have a legal expert lawyer on to answer all of your questions within the realm of special education, 504s, IEP, FAPE. What is it, right? Like, we don't want you to be overwhelmed. We want you to have the information that you need to be able to make the best decisions for your child and to be able to effectively advocate. And as I always say, you, parents and families, are the most credible source of information when it comes to your children. And so don't let anybody talk you down. You can see here next to me in this box, lovely Shay. Shay, go ahead and tell the people who you are.
I'm Shay Mackin from Texas. I'm the National Parents Union Policy Chief, mama of 4 boys, 3 adults, and one little one, almost a teenager. That's who I am. And there's storms here in Texas, so hopefully my internet stays good.
Yeah, I hope the storms go away. My dad lives in Texas, so I definitely am sending prayers and thoughts your way. All right, Bernita, go ahead and tell the people who you are.
Hello, my name is Bernita Bradley, and I am a mom of two wonderful adult children. Not an empty nester yet, but ain't worried
Wait,
about
no,
it.
no, shout
And
out to adult children. Shout out to
yes,
adult
yes,
children.
shout out
We
to
made
those
it
adult
over the.
children. Yes, made it over the heat. Um, and then I have this wonderful 4-year-old grandson named Malachi, who I'm staying in this fight on behalf of, along with the other children across this country, right? I'm the director of Parent Voice for the National Parent Union and proud grandmama, proud community mama, auntie, and I will fight you over people's children in a good way.
Well, hey, that's a righteous fight. Like that's just what it is. And so we have a very special guest who is also a parent, just like all of us and all of you, in the state of Minnesota. And so, would you please go ahead and tell the people who you are?
Sure. My name is Maren Christensen Hofer. And as you mentioned, I am the parent of an amazing 10-year-old autistic son who is my pride and joy. And I also work and am the executive director for an organization called the Multicultural Autism Action Network. And as the name suggests, our mission in life is connecting families of autistic children in our multicultural communities with resources and support. So that's really what gets me excited and the work that I'm happy to talk about. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being with us. It's always important for us to be able to share best practices and our knowledge and our wisdom with our with other parents. I just think about, and my heart goes out to all of the parents who have kindergartners just coming out of the pandemic. Like, what does that look like? And do you have the information that you need? But you know what? We're right here, willing to provide that information with you. As you can see, we're live. You can go ahead and drop your questions, comments, feedback. If you have a resource that we didn't list, please, and go ahead. By all means, we're sharing and caring. And so as you drop your questions in the comment field, we are going to do the best that we can to answer all of them. If we don't, please, reach out to one of us at the National Parents Union with your question that we didn't answer, because I'm going to try to get to everyone. And we will definitely send you a response. All right. So today, what are we talking about? We're talking about special education and really looking to break some of the stigma behind it. I know that there's, children that have what is classified as a disability, a diagnosis that's classified as a disability. And there's a lot of ambiguity or confusion behind, what do I do when my child goes to school and they have a diagnosis that's classified as a disability? And some of you parents and families that have kiddos with severe asthma and allergies, this session is for you, right? Some of you parents that may have children that are diabetic or pre-diabetic, this session is for you, right? We don't want to just look at the area of diagnoses as specific learning disabilities, but there are other health impairments that would qualify your child for special services so that they can fully access their educations while they're at school, right? Because we want to make sure that every single one of our children are able to fully have what they need to access their education while they are at school. So I'm going to start with Che, and she has some information that she wants to share with you guys. And so let's dive in. And I'll share on the screen.
All right. So oh, sure. So I also have a couple kiddos that have had some learning difficulties in their education realm. And as I was advocating for them and helping other parents advocate for their kids, I came across a really good org called the Jonathan Foundation out of California. And they have some really great resources, because I remember I was really confused as to what like an IEP was compared to a 504, and when would a parent need one, and all that stuff. So I thought I would share a couple of those, and I will post those in the chat.
I'm also trying to bring them up on the screen, and so I'm gonna go ahead and bring those this one up on the screen. Y'all forgive me because I usually say give me some grace with the technology. I might have to get my son Daniel on here to help me sometimes out with this technology, and making sure I don't lose all of you wonderful people. So let me just go to. Okay, I think we got it. Right here. Yep. So this is what you're talking about. Can y'all see it? Do I need to?
Yes. I can totally see it, Christina.
Okay. And then is everyone still on the screen?
And this is just one of many. This is just one of many orgs that have put together stuff. And of course, how did it start? It's from a mom who also was confused and needed help, and figured out we all need help in all of this. And so that's what NPU does, right, is connect you guys with the tools or resources that you need. Since you're in charge of that doc right now, Christina, I'm going to hit, there's the link for people. And that's this on, is it page 2 or 3, Christina?
Okay, let's see here. Let's see here.
Some reasons why we may need 504 are definitely what Christina was talking about. It's not just reading and writing difficulty, just thinking or concentrating difficulty.
So can we stop right here real quick? So for those of you that don't know, what is a 504 plan, right? And as you can see, it's right here. What is a 504 plan like? That can sound real fancy when you're asking for it, and people can make you feel like you're asking for some special favors, right? But that's not what this is. And so let's go ahead and talk about what that is. The general overview of 504 plans is similar to IEPs, albeit with much less clarity and guidance. Okay. So for those of you that don't know, these are laws that we're talking about. IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Educational Act. And then there was the Rehabilitation Act of 1974, a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of diabetes. So Section 504, federal Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, you can look that up, right? Of this act continues to play an important role in education, especially for students with disabilities who may not qualify for special education services under IDEA, okay? And you can type it, you're in your Google search bar anytime you want IDEA, but I'm going to show you some other websites that can help you, really breaks it down in ways that are not intimidating, or what does that mean, after you finish reading it. And so that's why we're here. The second paragraph says, according to the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, they often have exchanges with parents, teachers, and administrators about what a 504 plan is and does, okay? There is a lot of confusion surrounding 504 plans, partly due to a lack of awareness, okay? A lack of awareness. So when you have the awareness, it, alleviates the confusion. And that's why we do these shows, right? Or required processes and procedures for obtaining and accessing programs, accommodations, right? So when that confusion happens, as you can see, it results in multiple violations of Section 504 each year by public schools, right? So I'm going to stop sharing and talk about that a little bit. And we have Christy Moreno on. Hi, Christy. If you could go ahead and I think we lost Shay. She's in the storm, y'all. Sending good thoughts her way, prayers her way. If you can go ahead and tell the people who you are, that would help us out so people can know how to reach you too. That would help.
Absolutely. Buenas tardes, everybody. My name is Christy Moreno. I'm the National Parents Union delegate for the state of Missouri, so I'm part of the Midwest region. I'm very passionate about language access for our parents, and also very protective of our English language learners. And so those are my passions and my places of focus. But I'm a parent with a kid with a 504 plan that has consistently and constantly having to advocate for my very own. And so this is a great opportunity for me to join this conversation, as well as to learn from all of you. And so, yes, that's who I am. You can reach me at christy@npunion.org.
Thanks for sharing that. And so, I want to share about that too a little bit more, right? My daughter, who has severe citrus allergies, was the carrier of an EpiPen. Okay. And sometimes when our kiddos have allergies, it also triggers their asthma, which can become very life-threatening, right? EpiPen's one thing, but when you get into the asthma, that's a whole other specific category. And, for a little while, school was okay until she came into contact with those things that trigger allergies. Sometimes people don't recognize that there's citrus in everything. It's a preservative, it's in lotion, it's in all kinds of stuff. You see in those labels, it says citric acid. Well, guess what? She's allergic to citrus, right? So you can come with just a lotion, or you could have just washed your hair in some lovely orange blossom shampoo, but not around my daughter, right? And so when that happened, if she was in coming into contact with those allergens, she would be sick for more than a month, y'all. Okay. And wouldn't be able to go back into an environment where there was the possibility of her getting sick because of the respiratory issues and everything else. Well, what happens then, right? We have the 504, which says, you can't discriminate against her. And, if there is something required, like special seating, extra time on tests, work, everything else, yeah, that works. But when you start missing school for months at a time, you need a little bit more than that. Okay, so that's when we started to talk about the difference between having a 504, which protects your student and accommodates them to a certain point, and then requiring an IEP, which will offer remediation services or other types of supports that they may need, right, to be successful in their education. So I'd like to turn over to Marin. I'm sorry if I didn't.
It's Marin, but that's okay. No
Marin,
worries.
Marin, I got it right now. Okay, thank you. And if you could talk a little bit about your journey, so that people understand, like, this is something that you have to know.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. My own son was diagnosed as autistic when he was about 3. And as is the case with many autistic children, we first started to notice that something was a little bit unusual or out of the ordinary with his development when he got kicked out of preschool. And that is a really common occurrence with autistic children. And of course, what we didn't realize at the time was that preschool environment with lots of children was really overwhelming for him from a sensory processing perspective. So just the act of being in a room with a lot of other kids would send him into, complete overwhelm. And at the time we were really puzzled about what was going on. We didn't really understand what autism was or how it presented itself in kids. We didn't understand about sensory processing differences. So we went in to see, what was going on and try to figure out what was happening, and eventually came up with the diagnosis. And, particularly in the autism world, one thing that's really important for families to know is that there's a big difference between an educational label or an educational assessment and a medical diagnosis. Those are two completely different things and two different pathways to different sets of services. And here we're talking specifically about the school pathway, which can lead down to those 504 plans and those IEPs, which are so important for setting a child up for success. And part of that is that initial assessment when there's a whole battery of tests that may be done to kind of assess, does your child have any learning disabilities? Do they have developmental delays? Do they have sensory processing differences? Do they have any physical challenges that would require occupational therapy or physical therapy? And those assessments are kind of that gateway. That's that first step that ends up building the foundation for your IEP. And they will all contribute to a section of the IEP that's called the present levels. And we really kind of think about that as the foundation to the house, where it's really important for parents to understand that, everything you identify as a need for your child has to be written in that present level. If it isn't identified there, then you won't be able to set goals or receive services to address those specific needs if they aren't identified in the present level. So that's one message I would have for families, is to be really sure that you get those present levels right. From there, we went through the IEP process with our school. And, in the district we are in, it's really challenged for resources. So it was a struggle to try and get the support. Especially in the autism world, kids present so differently and have, such completely separate needs. Some kids are really challenged with communication. Other children, have no trouble with expressive language, but may have a lot of sensory processing differences. Often that sensory integration piece is a really important piece of it in the autism world. And throughout this whole process, for my personal journey, I kept thinking about, this is incredibly difficult to navigate this system. And, our family came from a position of great privilege where, we had a lot of experience navigating healthcare systems and the paperwork and all that kind of stuff. But I kept thinking about, what does this look like for some of our families that maybe don't speak English as their first language? Or some of our families, that are from cultural communities that prioritize oral communication over written. In my previous work, I had done a lot of contact with our immigrant communities. And so it was kind of in the back of my mind that if it's this hard for me, what does it look like for some of our other communities? And that's really when I got started with the Multicultural Autism Action Network as a volunteer, just trying to work with families and see, like, what are their challenges? What help can I offer? Can I help families navigate these systems that can be so complicated? And that's how I kind of got started doing that work. And our organization really focuses primarily on the Somali and Oromo communities in Minnesota. That's kind of the bulk of our work. And we do training for parents. We do a lot of self-advocacy and helping build capacity in the community. We try to make sure that our multicultural communities are represented in policy issues and that their voice is heard, and that our agencies and our legislators understand how a lot of the disability policies affect our unique communities. And then we also do a lot of one-to-one support. We show up at IEP meetings. We will go with a family to a doctor's appointment. If they're appealing a service that was denied, we will go with them and kind of walk through that process so that families aren't so isolated and alone. And we all know, you can really feel that as a parent. That whole experience can be very isolating. It can be very intimidating. The process of navigating supports and services for our children can often feel like a foreign language in and of itself. So we really try to be there for families and let them know that they don't have to walk this path on their own.
Something was very triggering that you said, right? Your son was kicked out of preschool. Okay. Y'all know how I am. And as you start talking about babies getting kicked out of places, it's very triggering. And I see that Kulia is saying suspending. I'm going to bring this comment back up. Suspending preschoolers should be criminal. A lot of times you don't have this formal diagnosis in preschool and nursery, right? You kind of recognize there's something that's different from, my child when they're with their peers, and I see, but you start thinking, well, maybe it could be just, immaturity or some kind of developmental, thing that's going on that's going to just go away, right? Whatever. You're still trying to evaluate things, right? So I want you parents and families to know your thoughts are not way far off, right? When you're seeing things and you're like, well, I think there may be some issues, don't let anybody talk you out of figuring that out, okay? And then equally, stating that my child is not a behavior problem, okay? They just need a little extra help to be able to fully participate or fully access their education in this space. Are you able to help them? Okay. Don't kick them out and criminalize them. Are you able to help them? Because I tell you what happens when you expel a preschooler. Their thought about their education is not a happy one. And then they have all the way from K to 12 in higher learning to go, if they so choose, right? Having this thought that, man, I can't even, I'm getting kicked out over here. Nobody really wants me in this space. Stop, knock that off. Stop. I agree, Kulia. Stop suspending preschoolers. Who does that?
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
That actually, Minnesota has now passed a law that prohibited that practice. So now we have preschoolers and younger are no longer allowed to be suspended or expelled unless it's a very narrow set of circumstances. But we pretty much prohibited that practice. And there's legislation pending this session right now that would raise that up to third grade. Because we really don't think that serves kids very well. Like you said, exactly, what is the message that we send to the child about whether they belong in our school system, whether there is a place for them? And also to their family about, what we do here with kids is we send them away, we take them out, and we say there is no place for you right now because of your behavior. And we really need to flip that around and say, not what is this kid doing wrong, but what are we as adults doing that this kid is not supported, that this child cannot succeed in this environment, and how do we need to change the environment so that the child can succeed? That's the question we should really be asking.
So I'm gonna read a comment, and then you go ahead, Bernita, and chime in from one of our delegate and also committee members, Jamila Muhammad. And she wants to stress that parental rights and IEPs are that parents have the right to participate in every aspect of the process, from referrals, requesting evaluations, not wanting your kid to get suspended and expelled, but how can you help my child, right? Part of that. To attending all meetings, including disciplinary action and decision making, and having access to reports. She says, among our parent base, we find that parents are often unaware that they even have these rights, you know? So I wanted to bring that in. I thought it was a good time to say, we agree. We all agree, like,
Yes.
parents need to know. Go ahead, Bernita.
Yep. So I wanted to share my screen really quick if I could. I'm hoping it lets me share my screen. Okay, so it's not letting me. Christina, if I send you this link, would you open it up?
Sure enough. Okay. And so, as you guys can see, you're able to, we're live, y'all. Okay. You're able to send your questions, comments, feedback during this time. And stay tuned, because we have our lawyer coming up next, and you're going to be able to ask your questions to our lawyer live. We're, just want to make sure that everybody that just might have been tuning in understands this is a live show. You can go ahead and send your questions in. Just type them into the chat. I will be bringing this screen up right now, Bernita.
Thank you. So that was a good segue into parents, right? Like knowing your power when you're in these spaces for IEPs. Too often, as we advocate for families, we hear parents, some of their first comments is that, they told me what my child qualified for, right? Like they told me that my child would or wouldn't qualify for this, or they said that my child doesn't qualify for IEP. Like they said they did a test at school and they don't see a reason to do an IEP. This is a place of schools actually trying to misuse the IEP process. Like they are totally going against policy when parents are supposed to be in the process from start to finish. You as a parent have a right. And what we don't want you to do is look at us as like these superhero parents who, figured it all out and we got the perfect process. There's places where you can learn. So like in Michigan, we have Michigan Alliance for Families that help families around IEP processes. And that's the page that you're seeing around parent advocacy, how parents and students have a right to give their input. Say who's in the IEP meeting, who's not in the IEP meeting. They have a right to actually say, hey, I'm not satisfied with this result. What can you explain to me more about this result? And in a lot of cases, you have a right to pursue even outside evaluations or assessments to actually go along with your IEP.
Tim says we're superheroes, just to let y'all know.
We got our cape somewhere else, right? but like all of us are, right? Like parents, you are your child's first advocate, and that's the most powerful stance that you have as a parent. So don't let anybody like make you not feel like you have a right to speak up for your child. They try it all the time. But know your rights when you go into a place. We don't have like time to say every right, but there's places for you to look it up in your Department of Education rights for students with IEPs or special needs students. They have rights there on your state page. Read through them, and if you have questions about it, like you can always come to this hour, right? Like every month, and be like, hey. I have a question about this. What does this mean? Or you can hit us up on a chat and say, hey, what does this mean? Believe me, I'm not the advanced one here. Christina is the brain when it comes down to legal jargon. But if I don't know, or Christy doesn't know, or Shay doesn't know, we will tap Christina and be like, hey, can you help me understand this a little bit? right? But know that you are your child's first advocate, and it is okay for you to don't let anybody guilt you out of advocating for your child. Don't let anybody exclude you from a meeting and say, we had this closed door meeting about your child, and here's the paperwork that we came up with, and this is what we're going to offer your child. No, excuse me, we need to start this over because I was not aware of these meetings, and I need to have these. Who is the person who assessed my child? What did you assess them on? And go from there, right? And every single meeting you need to be a part of. And if you can't be there, find a family member or someone to stand in proxy. And you can ask for those meetings to be recorded when that family member is in there to stand in proxy for you. So that's all I want to say.
Could I add on to that a little bit? I think there's like two specific rights that I would just like to mention that I think a lot of parents maybe don't realize. And one of the most important tools that a parent has in their toolbook is that little checkbox at the end of the IEP that says, I decline. And every IEP has this. It's usually on the last page. It's usually with something called prior written notice, and we can explain a little bit about what that is. But you get the IEP, you read through it, and it varies a little bit from state to state. In Minnesota, you have 14 days. And if you don't like what that IEP says, or if you don't think it accurately presents where your child is or what their needs are or what services they need, you can check that box and say, no, I don't agree with this. And, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get an argument with the school. You can, it just means that the conversation isn't finished yet and you're not happy with the way the IEP is yet. And then again, that can trigger a couple of different things. But the other really important thing to know is that if you don't check that box, that your IEP will automatically go into effect as it is written, unless it's your first one. The rules are a little bit different if it's your very first IEP. But the default is if you don't do anything at all, that IEP will go into effect. If you check the box that says I decline, then the clock starts over again and you need to have another conversation with the school. And, hopefully you will come to agreement and you can, find something that everybody can live with and is comfortable with and really meets your child's needs. But I just want to make sure that parents are really aware that they do not have to agree. You can check the box that says I decline and go back and have another conversation.
Thank you so much. And so, Christy, I'm going to give you an opportunity if you want to chime in. And while you do that, I'm going to bring up, y'all know I got to bring something nerdy to the conversation, okay? Because it's about to be the U.S. Code. We're going to go straight to the source of definitions. And anybody can access this U.S. Code, okay? So I want to show you what that looks like and how you find that information in code, just in case you feel like you don't have the words. The words are there for you. Just, hey, copy, paste, U.S. code, this says this, and this is what I'm asking you for. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christy while I get that screen up.
I am so happy to be here. Marin, what you were saying resonated with me. I wish I knew what I know now 10 years ago when I was a much younger mother. And one of my kids almost got kicked out of preschool. And the reason it didn't happen was because I pulled them out before that happened because I didn't know any better. And I was like, clearly they don't want my child here. They don't know how to tend to their needs. I also want to stress the fact that you taught me something new today. And that is that I've always been throwing out the SPD, acronym. You told me how to use the word, did you say differences instead of disorder? And so for me, it's been very interesting also to learn how to speak about things and educate myself. Now I'm at a much different place. My children are older, but I wonder what supports do we have for young parents who are, we're thinking about that preschool stage where we're starting to see these different needs surface and how we can find the supports. I remember when we started looking at assessments, we were placed on a waiting list to have an assessment for like 8 to 12 months. And in the meantime, I had to continue taking my kid to a Head Start program and not being very comfortable with it. And so I was also a newcomer to this country. So there were a lot of barriers in my way to actually advocate effectively for my kid. Now things are different now, and part of my work is being able to support parents in my, you know, like I was in that situation. But how common is it for younger parents or parents of younger children to feel so lost, right, in this space?
Right. And so, you know, that's why, you know, and let me just say this, there is a lot when it comes to special education, law, policies, code, right? And just different aspects of it. And so no two people's situations may be the same. That's why it's an individualized education plan, right? So some of this is just going to be useful, and then other parts of it you might say, well, you know, that doesn't apply to me. It might apply to your neighbor. Help your neighbor out, right? And so here, as you can see, and I like to use credible sources of information when it comes to certain things, right? So if I'm looking for law, I'm going to use some law schools definitions, or maybe go to the actual site. But then sometimes I got my grandma eyes in the site that's really tiny print, and so I want to go somewhere where like I can like really see it really big. So I use Cornell Law School mostly. All right, so here we can see that US Code 20, and you see this little thing right here, means section 1414. It deals with evaluations, eligibility determinations, and individualized education programs and educational placements, right? So everything that we are breaking down for you from our experiences and from our just advocacy, and just being in this space of really trying to understand the most effective way to come with what our requests are and help parents to understand, you can see in writing as a part of the US Code, right? It'll tell you. And if you click on these, right, you'll be able to get more information. So when we go to what is a child with disability? Okay, can you guys see that? Did it switch over? It went to what is it went to the definition, child with disability? Nope. See, okay. So let's do stop sharing. And because I'm old fashioned, I'm just gonna keep doing it manual. Oh, this is always fun to me. All right, so we have this term right here, child with a disability. Just in case you have any questions, this is what the US Code says for evaluations, redeterminations, and individualized education plans. Son las estrellas. Muchas gracias, Mandy. Okay, and so child with a disability. In general, the term child with a disability means a child with intellectual disabilities, hearing impairments, including deafness, speech or language impairments, visual impairments, including blindness, serious emotional disturbance, referred to in this chapter as emotional disturbance, orthopedic impairments, autism, traumatic brain injury, other health impairments. Okay. I was talking a little bit about that when I said that severe asthma and allergies, right? I was talking about that, right? And so I lost my place. Oh, here we go. Or specific learning disabilities, and who by reason thereof needs a special education and related services. Okay. We're talking about services in the educational environment. Okay. What we're talking about, because there's homeschool parents that can ask the local, the LEA, to manage and administer their special education. So I don't want you to just say, oh, well, it has to be in this specific place. No, if you're a homeschool parent and you want to know how to do that, or, you know, you need help with that, reach out. We'll give you the resources. I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed. I had a parent reach out to me and say, I'm a homeschool mom, but I would like the LEA to evaluate my child for an IEP for services. Let's go. I'll show you how to do that, right? We might not have time today, but definitely we'll be able to give you those resources. By reason thereof, needs special education and related services. Child age 3 through 9, the term child with a disability for a child age 3 through 9, or any subset of that age range, including ages 3 through 5. May, at the discretion of the state and local educational agency, that's what I was talking about, that LEA, or sometimes people call them state educational agency, SEA, include a child experiencing developmental delays. I was talking about that in the beginning, as defined by the state and as measured by appropriate diagnostic instruments and procedures. I want you guys to see where it says appropriate, okay? The teachers are not medical practitioners or medical experts. I gotta say that, okay? So they're not gonna be able to diagnose, okay? Appropriate diagnostic, that might not be an appropriate diagnostic. However, they may be able to let you know what is happening with your child in the educational environment, and if using a measurement tool, if how that looks according to the developmental appropriate age and stages with their peers, right? What's happening in the classroom? How is my child engaging with their education, right? What is happening that may be, considered not appropriate, right? And let's talk about that, right? Some of the evaluations that the school psychologist is going to have, appropriate, right? In one or more of the following areas: physical development, cognitive development, communication development, social or emotional development, or adaptive development, and who by reason thereof needs special education related services, okay? So you see that this is the actual definition. And if you believe that one of your children or your child falls within this category, hey, you know what? Take it, copy and paste it. I believe that my child falls within this category and I would like them evaluated for services, an IEP, a 504, whatever that may be, look like to you, right? I'm not telling you specifically what to do, but if you just don't feel like you have the words, then go ahead and utilize this. Now let's go back to the other screen for the US code so that you can see that those areas are addressed, okay? Those areas are addressed for you. So don't think like, oh, well, there's really nowhere that I can find this. It's here, okay? You have procedures, you have, requests for initial evaluation, right? Right here, right? Part of the US code. And so I want you not to become overwhelmed, but when you get an opportunity, take your time. If you feel like this is something that you are requiring for your child, take your time and go through this. Don't ever jump into any kind of situation without knowing what is going on and what is involved, right? I've seen more people get talked out of their rights for stuff, intimidated, bullied, and threatened. You feel like you're going into this meeting. It might be a school SST, like a school study team meeting, or a 504 meeting. You're just asking for something, and you come into this big meeting, and all of a sudden you feel like you're on trial. Okay, that's why Bernita said, "Try not to go alone." Right? Rights law says, "Don't go alone." That's another place where you can find a lot of helpful information that you can use when requesting things. So I just wanted you to be aware. I'm going to go to this next screen because I believe that this is a very helpful site. Now, there's a lot of helpful sites that I have seen when it comes to having information already collated and already ready, but here is one of them. I'm not able to share all of them. One of them is Understood. Understood.org has templates, has binder examples, pictures, you name it, right? So that you are fully prepared with your ask. You can go to Understood. There's a site called Don't IEP Alone, okay? Don't IEP Alone has some great resources that you can utilize to help. And if someone is able to put that in the chat while I bring up this screen, that's good too. Understood.org, Don't IEP Alone, and Rights Law. The set of foundational and fundamental understanding, just in case you don't want to spend your nights going through US code like I do. So you can definitely go to these places and they have these resources collated for you to utilize, templates and everything else, right? Ready to go. And so here we have one of those resources, and it is Smart Kids 6 Principles of IDEA, right? As you can see, like we said, IDEA is the federal law that provides protections for students with learning disabilities and other disabilities. Among the key provisions are the right to a free and appropriate education. You might hear that termed as IDEA and FAPE, right? IDEA and FAPE. So that's what that is, okay? I want you guys to understand the terms that are being used when you're asking for stuff and when you're in meetings. And if you ever feel like you don't understand, ask them for a sheet that breaks down acronyms and abbreviations. Don't continue a meeting if you do not understand. You need to say, what are these abbreviations and acronyms that you're using? I do not understand what they are. And there's a lot of people in this meeting. And if you guys keep using abbreviations and acronyms, I'm going to be lost. Simple, right? Use your voice. This is your child's education. They don't get a K-12 education redo. And so want you to, really have this information so that you can utilize your voice in the most powerful and effective way. Okay, so here we see. Go ahead. You can go ahead and chime in. Mm-hmm.
Christina, could I just add something to that conversation?
Please do.
One of the things that's so incredibly important for families to remember is that this has to take place in writing. It is not sufficient to simply say to a teacher in a hallway, I think maybe my child should be assessed for special education. You need to put it in an email. You need to put it in a letter. And you mentioned that there are a lot of templates out there. Understood and Wright's Law and many of those sources you mentioned have some great templates where you can just kind of fill in the blanks. But I think it's Pete Wright from Wright's Law who says, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen as far as concerned. So I think that's really important for people to remember. And I think it's also really important that we talk about that in the context of some of the multicultural communities that we serve. Again, our organization works primarily with Somali and Oromo communities that prioritize oral language over written language. There really was no written Somali language until fairly recently. So it's much more comfortable to just have a phone conversation, to, talk to someone in person. But our system really depends on putting things in writing. So if that doesn't feel comfortable to a parent, ask someone for help. Go to one of those parent information centers or, some of the other organizations that we talked about and get that help, because if it's not in writing, it really didn't happen as far as the IEP is concerned.
Can I ask a question there? Can I ask you to add to what that in writing means, right? Like, because some people think in writing means to hand it to the local secretary. And then people can often say, like, oh, I didn't get a letter. I didn't know what that letter was for. I thought that was a permission slip, right? And then your stuff kind of falls through the cracks for time keeping sake. But like actually sending emails, CCing the principal, like I'm a believer in, if you've asked a teacher for something or a social worker for something, you don't get resolved, like email everybody, everybody that has contact with your child on a daily basis.
Right.
So nobody can say that they didn't. And it don't have to be a perfect email, right? It could just be, I want an IEP for my child. I asked you last Thursday and I did not get a response. Can you tell me when I should know? Because you're supposed to legally respond to me within 10 business days, right?
So that's another thing, right? Understanding that there are timetables, right? People don't get to just say, oh, they requested an IEP in writing and I'm going to wait till the next school year. Look in your state's legislation to understand the timetables, right? And they exist for a purpose, okay? Make sure you know that when you're requesting an evaluation, when you're requesting a meeting, or if you are requesting an addendum, is there a timetable, right? Once you have the IEP, if you're, or 504, if you're requesting an addendum, and say, for instance, you put that request in, and they don't just get to say, oh, I'm going to wait till, 2025, and then I'll, look at your addendum. No. So my thing is, keep a binder of all of this information, and so that you have it in one place. When you're putting in requests, always do that in writing, some type of written communication. Believe it or not, people, parents, families, I have parents that were under the belief that their child had an IEP and that was a verbal agreement. Okay. And unfortunately, that becomes hearsay. Okay. That becomes hearsay. Like, oh, well, the teacher said that they were going to be doing, and this person said, well, is that in writing? And how are they measuring that? There's a system that's in place for a purpose, right? So before we turn to our lawyer, like I said, we're going to have our second hour, ask our lawyer. Make sure that you're dropping your questions in the chat. Definitely want to hear from you. But before we go there, because sometimes I am that complainer, I'm going to show you how to do that formally. Okay. So if you feel like your child's or your rights were violated in that realm of 504s, IEPs, children with disabilities, there's a place where you can go and fill out a form. And it might be helpful, and might have to take that into another realm. We'll talk about that another day. We'll talk about the judicial system. Okay. But definitely having this understanding will let you know. There's parents that I've talked to just this week that said, I didn't even know I was being violated. Sometimes you don't know, right? And then 3 years later, you figure it out, like, wow, I was violated, and how I'm going to get that time back. Okay. And so let's look at okay, right here. All right. So here we have the Office for Civil Rights at the United States Department of Education. And so a lot of people haven't even heard, like, what? The U.S. Department of Education has an Office for Civil Rights? Yes. And they want to make sure, hopefully, that they protect students with disabilities. And so even knowing how to effectively file a complaint when your child's rights have been violated is something that you want to read up on too, because it's not always that you're just going to fill out the online how to file a complaint form, which you can see under related topics on the right there, and get that automatically heard by them, but effectively writing one and keeping that documentation, right? Keeping that documentation is going to be important, so that if you have to raise the issue, and I don't know why my watch is beeping, y'all, I'm sorry. But when you have to raise an issue, or perhaps you have to go into some type of litigation situation over your child's SPED rights, you have that binder, you have that information, you have the know-how, right? And so I'm going to drop this information in the chat. And again, special education is a huge area, and we could just talk about this for weeks. Seriously, we could talk about this for weeks, but we're trying to get as much information to all of you, so that at least you have the basics, at least you have a foundational understanding. And for those of you that are very well seasoned, look, I'm like a third generation parent. Okay. I say I've been dropping the kid off at elementary school for 3 decades almost. And I'm not playing, y'all. Okay. I'm serious. And I have 4 grandchildren. So you can expect me to stay in this fight. Okay. I'm going to still be sitting here giving out this information, as long as possible. But had I known with my now adult children what I know now, I would have been able to do things more efficiently, quicker, right? And not get talked out of some of my rights, because schools wanted to save money or whatever the purpose was for that, right? And I got to tell you that when my adult children were just entering in the school, I was a district employee, okay? And I thought we could just do things on the honor system. No. Okay. So for those of you that may be teachers, your child has a right to get what they need under IDEA and FAPE too. Don't let that role that you have as an educator intimidate you out of effectively asking for and receiving what you need, because that is a real and present threat. Like if I push too hard about my child's rights under FAPE, IDEA, Federal Section 504, I might be jobless tomorrow. You know, I've had parents who have stated that. And so I know that it happens, and I know how I felt being a district employee at that time, and like really not, really thinking that an honor system, like, we're all, friends here. No, not when it comes to special education rights and responsibilities. So as we move into our Ask a Lawyer hour, I want you guys to really be taking these resources. And if you have any questions, again, please reach out to us. But I want to give everyone on this panel a final word in this segment, and then we'll move into, and you guys don't leave because we'll still be here in the Ask a Lawyer hour, but I want you guys to give a final word of encouragement or admonition to the parents around the information we just provided.
I just wanted to chime in with something that I'm noticing quite a bit, and talking to other parents and experienced it myself with my own child, is that in a time where we're seeing so many substitute teachers coming in and out, and administrators not informing the substitute teachers that there's so many this child has an IEP, that has been a point of conflict for me quite a bit even with my own school for my children, is that the substitute teachers are not aware. And so everything that is in my case, in a 504 plan is not being implemented. And also not only that, but the wrong things are being done, right? And so is there any guidance? Is there any policy? Is there anything other than self-advocacy and going in there and saying this is not being implemented that we can show Christina or Marin or Bernita that is written, that is part of this, and saying all of the staff members, every adult that comes in contact in the learning environment of the child needs to be aware of the IEP or the 504?
So let's hang on to that question for our legal expert. And I know she will be more than glad to answer that question for you all, because I'm sure you're not the only one with that question, right? People have questions around field trips, right? And so we'll go ahead and save that question. Thank you. Bernita, do you have a final, not a final, but a word of admonition or encouragement?
Yep. So just want to encourage families to really stay in the fight. And then we said it a lot during this process that when you're advocating, the changes you make is you're not just advocating for your child, right? You're advocating for all the children at the school. And when they see that kids like us have eyes on them, and they kind of tread a little softer, right? So know that whatever you learn, Christina said you may learn some stuff that doesn't apply to your child, but at least while you're learning, I can just about guarantee you're going to run across another IEP parent or a 504 plan parent or IE parent, and you're going to be able to tell them, look, like my child doesn't have this diagnosis, but here's a place for you to go, right? Like here's some type of support for you to advocate for your child. And so just make sure we advocating, not just for ours, but for all the children.
Thank you. Marin.
Yeah, I think my one comment would just be that you don't have to do this alone. It can be really overwhelming and there's a lot to learn, but there's also a lot of other families that have approached the system and a lot of other advocates out there that can help you find your path through. And that IEP is a legally binding document. And don't ever forget that. You are your child's best advocate and you are an integral part of that team. So if it feels overwhelming, reach out and find some of those support resources and know that you don't have to do this on your own.
So I'm one of those radical people that will probably go to the local, to my local church, to the local retirement home, and bring a whole bunch of folks with me, okay? For my IEP team to be balanced, and for there just to be some lovely faces talking about how great my child is, right? I am that person, and I probably buy them some Starbucks and say, let's go. right? Everybody doesn't have that opportunity. So definitely, if you're looking for some support, reach out to NPU. We have delegates that represent each state across this nation. And if we don't have the right, answer for you, we will connect you to another resource. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, like, wow, this already sounds like too much, then, reach out. We don't want you to go at this alone. That's why we do this. We don't want any parent or any family out there feeling like they're by themselves in this process. I'm so confused. I have a child that I really know needs, some extra help and protection, right? And so reach out to us. No question is too simple. And no question it'll be too hard. Okay, just go ahead and make sure you reach out. And with that being said, as you can see, we're transitioning into our Ask a Lawyer hour. Welcome, Andrea. Thank you so much for being on today. Could you please let everyone know who you are, where you're at, and what you do?
Yeah, are you able to hear me okay, first of all?
Yes.
Excellent. My name is Andrea Jepson. I'm an education law attorney practicing in St. Paul, in Minnesota. I'm also a parent. I have a 27-year-old son with autism. I have a 27-year-old stepson with ADHD, and I have a 22-year-old daughter with ADHD and anxiety. My son and my stepson were on IEPs. My daughter was on a Section 504 plan. I met my husband in special education preschool. So special education can give you so much. For me, it gave me a career. I decided to go to law school because I was excited about the advocacy that I was doing. But you can find love too, so you just never know. But currently what I do, I'm not right now representing students. I haven't for about a year and a half. I started with a colleague, a special education clinic at the University of St. Thomas School of Law, and we are teaching future attorneys because there is such a tremendous shortage of education law attorneys, and then also serving children in that clinic as well. So my practice historically has centered around special ed, disability discrimination, and then I also did a lot of work with suspension and expulsion, which in Minnesota, and I think that this is probably true across the country, has been disproportionately used against students of color and students with disabilities. So that is who I am.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know that, we have a lot of questions ready to go. I have some here that parents sent in advance, and I know Christy just asked one. And so definitely appreciate you giving your time to the parents across the nation that are watching this, and for sharing your story, right? You guys never know where your advocacy might lead you.
That is
really
true.
Don't. And so stay encouraged and stay in the fight, because a lot of us started out with, advocating for our children, and it led to the opportunity to help other people and build up communities. And so that's what we do here. Thank you so much. And so let's start with Christy's question, since that was the outro of the last session, and to hear.
Absolutely. So Christy was wondering what could be done to ensure that a child's rights were protected where substitute teachers are concerned, and substitute teachers often are not aware of the needs of the child and the school district's obligation to the child. I'm sorry to tell you that's often true with non-substitute teachers as well. So unfortunately, it's not a problem that's unique to substitute teachers. And I think that self-advocacy is the most effective way to accomplish the protection of your child's rights. There is nothing that prohibits you from giving a copy of your IEP to every teacher and every substitute teacher in particular, and discussing with those teachers what's in your child's IEP. In many communities, in many states, the administrative complaint system is one that hasn't been very effective for parents. State agencies have really struggled to address substantive issues when they come up in complaints. But if state agencies tend to do well with very simple matters that recently occurred. So if on a Monday a substitute teacher violates your child's rights, on a Tuesday I'd be making a state complaint. Because once you've assembled 4 or 5 or 10 of those, it really does start to get people's attention. So I encourage people to use the state complaint system early and often, and even for what the school might feel are trivial violations. It is how you get people's attention if you don't ask too much of the state, because unfortunately they're often not able to deliver.
I have a question about field trips.
Okay.
And the releases of liability while students are on field trips. Does that apply to students that have IEPs and 504s? And if so, can parents opt out of that and still allow their child to go on the field trip?
So I'd have to look at what I've never seen a release of liability with a field trip, so that's fascinating to me. So there's kind of two issues at play, and one is personal injury law, and I'm not a personal injury specialist, and the other one is the rights of children with disabilities. And you can't sign away your child's right as a person with a disability using a liability waiver. So there are going to be some heightened obligations for kids who might wander, right?
Right.
And I don't think any release of liability is going to be effective where special education matters are concerned, but I'm not qualified to talk about personal injury law, and particularly in states outside of Minnesota. But I mean, they might say that, I guess a school district, if those are permissible in your state, might say your child's not able to attend, but I don't know that I would worry about infringing on your child's rights as a person with a disability because of a liability waiver.
Thank you. And then here's a question from Texas. Can a parent request their child's 504 plan change from in-person to online due to medical reasons, due to a child is being bullied, or due to a child is being bullied at school? So those are two questions,
Two
right?
questions. Okay. So absolutely, where medical reasons are concerned. Actually, let me sort of play that a little bit. So, I mean, if the medical reason is a disability-related reason, then yes, there's no question that a child could be learning online as an accommodation. And there's something that I want to tell you about. There's actually a few things I want to make sure that you know about Section 504 plans. And the first one is we frequently talk about reasonable accommodations when we talk about accommodations. And reasonable is a modifier of accommodation. It means that not all accommodations are necessarily something that the school district has to offer, or that an agency has to offer. But there is no reasonable where accommodations are concerned under Section 504. It's absent from the regulations. So if your child needs an accommodation for equal access, equal opportunity to participate, and equal opportunity to benefit from their education, then they get the accommodation. So normally reasonability, like in an employment setting, there might be a question of cost, there might be a question of whether it fundamentally changes the business. None of that analysis goes into a 504 discussion.
Right.
In terms of due to a child being bullied. So if the bullying is creating or exacerbating a disability-related issue, then yes, no question. And I mean, it's a little bit of a challenge, right? Because it's difficult for anybody to afford a lawyer. So if you're looking for somebody to bring out like a negligence action, I mean, part of it is going to depend on whether the child's being bullied because they're a child with a disability. So that's a clear form of disability discrimination, and complaints can be made either to your state agency or to OCR, but that takes a long time. It's a little more complicated when you're talking about whether a child should be bullied, but in the end, you've got to protect your kid. I mean, that's just the most important thing. It's a little less clear when you're talking about bullying. It's probably not the most effective way to handle bullying because your kid has a right to an education and you don't want to deprive them of that opportunity for socialization, but you also have to keep your kids safe.
Exactly. All right, here is another question. And I'm trying to take that one there. Okay. My teacher said that my child is doing very well and no longer requires an IEP, but should have a 504. What do I do?
Okay. So this is
before too.
Yeah. No, this is a really good question. So first let's talk about the IEP, and then let's talk about 504 plans. And yeah, so the question is going to be whether the medical so maybe you have a kid with an anxiety disorder, and then the kid with an anxiety disorder has an exacerbation of their anxiety, then yes, there's absolutely no question. It just gets a little more complicated if the kid needs. It depends on whether we identify the medical treatment as being related to a disability. So for the child who's being exited from special education, so it's important to understand the school district's reason for arguing that the child needs to be exited from special education. So if a recent evaluation has been conducted and the school district believes that shows the child is not eligible, you're going to want to look at the evaluation and make sure that all areas of disability related need, all educational need has been properly evaluated. And sometimes, one of the challenges in getting your child's needs met is that it can take a lot of resources, and we just don't all have that.
Right.
But it's important to, if you're able to talk to experts in the field to ensure that appropriate evaluations were conducted. So if your child has a communication disorder, then you want to make sure that, in fact, the evaluation really was appropriate for that child by talking to a communication expert. If the child has a reading disorder, then you're going to want to talk to somebody who has expertise in reading to make sure that the evaluation was properly conducted. And we're looking at a kid in the clinic right now who was, in fact, exited from special ed. And we don't even have to be experts to see that the child's evaluation was poorly done. But it does get hard to make that evaluation if you don't have somebody with some experience and authority who can say, yes, I practice in this area and this part of the evaluation is terrible. If the child is being exited because they've met all their goals and objectives, argues the school district, it's also important to consult with an expert if you can do that, to see whether the expert believes that the goals and objectives bring that child to effectively grade level, right? So, and we're looking at this as well. So a kid has learned how to answer WH questions, but that's not all people need in order to function in the world. So he's going to have additional communication related needs, and we need to know what they are. So again, an expert is helpful if you can access one. But one of the things that you can do, and it's critical and poorly disseminated information about progress on goals and objectives. I have never seen an IEP that had truly measurable goals and objectives, and I have never seen an educational record where progress reporting was done appropriately. So I cannot say anything. Well, this is one of the two most important things that I can tell you about special education. If you look at your child's goals and objectives, every single one of them should have an initial baseline. And that initial baseline should involve an actual measurement. So if I want to lose 10 pounds, I'm never going to know whether I lost 10 pounds. Really. I mean, I might not realize my jeans are looser, but I'm never going to know I lost 10 pounds if I don't step on the scale now. If I want to improve how fast I run by a mile an hour, I got to know how fast I run now. You must have initial baselines. And almost every IEP I have ever seen, and I have seen many hundreds of IEPs, lacks initial baseline. You cannot measure progress, and that is the essence of an appropriate special education. You cannot measure progress without an initial baseline. You also have to have a measurable mastery standard. So improve is meaningless. Get better, get bigger, get smaller. It's got to involve a measurement. So, I mean, I come up with a, stupid weight loss analogy because it's really meaningful in my life. But pounds, you have to be going from pounds to pounds. You have to be going from words per minute to words per minute. You've got to go from, you can't measure apples and oranges. You got to know where you're starting and you got to know where you're ending, and they've got to match up as categories of measurement. And then you may know that children are entitled to progress reporting as often as children in the school districts get report cards, at least as often. Let me be very clear about that. At least as often as this, because some children will have a disability-related reason for more frequent progress monitoring and reporting. But the progress monitoring, so first of all, it's really common for school districts simply not to provide the progress reports to parents. It's a very, very serious violation. I heard, is it Marin? I think it was Marin. I think Marin. Okay, I heard Marin say, the parents are the experts and parents are the most critical members of the IEP team. And one of the reasons is that parents enforce their children's rights. So if you don't get progress reporting, you cannot know whether your child's program is effective, and you cannot perform the important responsibility of enforcing your child's rights. So it's a very serious violation of the law when you don't get the data that you need in order to know whether your child is progressing. And that progress reporting also must contain a measurement that is responsive to the baseline and the mastery standard inside. And you could solve a ton of problems if parents knew that and were coached in it and able to actually, respond. And people just don't know it. And it's important for I think all of you to know that I was an attorney while my child was still on an IEP, but I wasn't a special education attorney. And my colleague who teaches with me also was an attorney, but she wasn't a special ed attorney. We use our children's educational records as teaching tools, and they're a hot mess. So even lawyers don't know unless they practice in this area. So if your child isn't making progress, and you can tell if you have the appropriate data, then the school district has an obligation to go back to the table with you and rejigger the child's educational program. So, you might run into problems forcing the district to do that or still getting an appropriate program. But if you can do that early in a child's education before there's a lot of conflict on a team, when teachers are still interested in serving your child, it really is helpful. For a child who no longer qualifies, and the way you determine whether the child qualifies is you look at the eligibility categories. They're in the IDEA, and a lot of states have their own descriptions that have to be consistent with the IDEA that describe how you determine whether a child qualifies. And that's what you have to do. You have to measure or compare a good evaluation of your child against the eligibility categories. But for a child who ends up on 504, this really isn't a disaster. And this is the second most important thing I can tell you today. If you just remember, you're looking for measurability in your goals and objectives. and that there are reasons, important reasons, why Section 504s are not, the unattractive stepsister of special ed. You'll have, I think, powerful tools in your toolkit. You can find the Department of Education Section 504 regulations online. They're not a hard read. And what you'll find out, which is an absolute surprise to most parents, and shockingly to most educators and administrators, is that, so that's the idea, you're looking for Section 504.
I was bringing it up.
Okay, no, I know you.
And then I'm all late on it, so y'all.
No worries.
Bring it up as much as I can. But I'll also be dropping some of the information that she's given to these certain rules and determination of eligibility in the chat, just in case I don't bring it up. So I wanted to give you guys an example of the links that I were putting in the chat. This is what it will look like. Okay. All right.
So if you look at the regulations, and you can find them online, it's not too hard. What you'll see is that there's a very different standard for a legal education under Section 504 than there is for an IEP. And by the way, all of your kids on IEPs are covered by Section 504. It doesn't matter whether they have a plan or not. Section 504 is a disability discrimination statute, and the IDEA is a special education statute. So not every kid who's on a 504 is going to qualify under the IDEA, but every kid under IDEA is going to qualify for protection under Section 504. And the standards are different. Under IDEA, we're looking at a more complicated and challenging sort of standard for success. But the law is very clear about what the standard is under Section 504, and that is equal access, equal opportunity to benefit, and equal opportunity to participate. And that's really, really powerful. So even for your kids who are on IEPs, you want to say, that's great, but what about the Section 504 standards? Because that's equality. What's shocking to schools is that services, special education services, are available and warranted, could be warranted under Section 504. So you may not end up with goals and objectives in the way that you would see in a IEP, but speech, PT, OT, a reading specialist, whatever the kid needs to have equal access, equal opportunity for participation, and equal opportunity for benefit. Those services are available. The only difference between, the only real meaningful differences between Section 504 and the IDEA is that Section 504 doesn't contain an opportunity for transition services. Transition services are actually really important. They're almost always done poorly by school districts. So it's really typical for school districts to say, Johnny is going to fill out an interest survey, or Johnny's going to go online and find out what the obligations are to be an electrician. And that's not a transition plan. So think of all the things that your kids might need to fulfill the purpose of the IDEA, which is future independence. It's the opportunity to live in the community. It's the opportunity to prepare you for future employment. It's preparation for future education. That is the end point. That's what we're expecting for our kids at the end of their special education. So your kid might need to learn how to take feedback from an employer. Your kid might need legal instruction in their rights as an employee or as a future college student. Your kid might need information on how to pay a bill, or how to ride a bus, or how to do grocery shopping, or how to choose healthy food, or how to budget. I mean, think of all the things that go into independent living. And we understand not every kid's going to live fully independently, but we're looking to maximize independence and the opportunities for future education and employment. And if you think about it, our kids oftentimes have so many transition needs, and you'll blow the socks off an educator when you say, I look at my kid and his executive functioning challenges, and I don't know how he's going to keep a budget. I'd like you to teach him that. But that is absolutely appropriate and required under the IDEA. So you don't get that under Section 504, but you still get a lot of, you still have a lot of powerful rights and opportunities for service. But I've never seen a Section 504 that has services in it, and that really is a shame.
Yeah, that is. That is. I have the next question up. What are the LEA's responsibilities under child find rules?
Well, I'll give you, they're broad, so I can give you a kind of a general understanding, but the LEA has an absolute obligation to find all children suspected of having a qualified disability on their borders. So and it doesn't matter whether the kid's at private school or not, right? They have to find these kids. They have to have a mechanism for doing it. And then once they find them, then they have to fully evaluate them, both for eligibility or potential eligibility, and then also to fully understand their educational needs, whether they're commonly associated with their disability or not. But the simplest thing to say is that the obligation is to find children suspected of having a qualifying disability is absolute.
Could I ask a question while we're here?
Yeah.
One of the families that we've been supporting had a situation arise the other day. Their child is in a federal setting 1, which is the maximum amount of interaction with their general education peers. And their school told them that their child couldn't receive services without changing the federal setting. What would your reaction be to that? Are those two things tied together?
Well, it all comes down to the child's ability to progress. So if they say we only give services in the special ed room, that's against the law. But if the child, needs a degree of intensity and quiet that isn't going to work in the general ed room, then if they need to be removed to progress, then they need to be moved to progress. But so as a general statement, that would be wrong, but it really comes down to the individual needs of the child.
How would you suggest the parent approach that with their school?
I'd be looking for an explanation of why. So what's the rationalization? So if the answer is that's just how we do it, well, that's wrong. If the answer is, this kid's got ADHD and it's, we're trying to do, and speech needs, and they're going to be distracted, and we fear that they aren't going to make progress on their goals and objectives if we don't have them giving their full attention, well, then that makes more sense. But if the answer is, we just don't do it that way, as you know, I'm a believer in early and frequent complaints to the state agency, because they're not going to be able to handle for the last year, my child suffered in this way, but this person just wrote me an email saying, as an absolute, we absolutely don't deliver special education services in a general ed classroom that they have the capacity to manage.
Thank you for that.
Of course.
All right. And thank you so much. This is so helpful. And what I like most about it is that if you missed part of it and you're just tuning in, you can go back after we're done on the live and watch this again, right? So it'll be here into perpetuity. I don't know how long that may be, but
it's living on the internet forever,
Exactly. And you'll have the opportunity to go back and watch and just take some more notes, get those resources that you need, this valuable information. Definitely want you that are just tuning in, if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to say, go ahead and drop that in the comment field, and we'll be asking those questions. And if we can't get to your question today, we'll definitely be reaching out. Any of us at NPU can reach out and offer you the answer or the resources that you need to help you make the best decisions possible for your children and advocate for them with your powerful voice as parents and families. Just hearing about the frequent and early complaints, right? I had a question that was along the lines of complaints. And so the parent says, I've made all of these complaints, nothing's changing. And as a matter of fact, my child's situation's gotten worse. What is it that I can do now? I am exhausted with making complaints. And so for those of you that have that same sentiment, you definitely want to hear what you can do next so that you can make that decision as soon as possible.
It's hard to answer that question without understanding what the nature of the complaints are and what kind of response that the school district gave. So, I mean, we're all struggling because the ultimate, way to enforce your child's rights is to file suit. The idea contains what's called a fee shifting provision, which means that Congress said, if a lawyer takes your case and you win your case, then your attorney's fees will be paid by the school district. And that was intended to encourage lawyers to take these kinds of cases. The problem with that is that anytime you're advocating for a disfavored group of people, so people who are sort of shunted to the sides, the courts and hearing officers will oftentimes look the wrong way. And it can take a long time. It can take, starting at, you go through the administrative hearing process, you might appeal to the federal district court, you might appeal to your circuit. That can take years, that can become exceedingly expensive. You can be up and down depending on the kinds of decisions you get that you are get from the courts. And there's a very, very good chance you will lose because judges, school districts exist, under a mantle of, I guess, goodwill. Schools, you sue school, why'd you sue your school? Nobody can imagine that. And there can be bias against kids with disabilities. They're hard cases to win. And so lawyers, frequently don't want to take those kinds of cases. So
wait, Andrea, you mean that they're not going to do it out of the goodwill and desire of their own hearts?
Well, they want to pay their bills. They want to be able to, right? I mean, I'll tell you that when I was taking clients, I gave about half of my billable time away. And at some point, my spouse said, before you take another pro bono case, we have to talk about this as a family. And it was hard to argue with that, right? Because I wasn't, pulling my weight, and we had kids who were going to school. We wanted to be able to help them. But, one of the things that we're trying to do at the clinic is encourage people in other practices to see how this could augment their practice. So family law attorneys see kids with special needs all the time. So if special ed isn't your bread and butter, you might feel like you could take a few. But there are interesting cases, particularly there was one in Montana where the facts were terrible. It was a kid who, if I remember correctly, was pretty severely affected by autism, and he was being educated off-site, like in a church basement, and his program consisted of sorting things, and sometimes that process was supervised by the janitor. And so the local P&A made a complaint to the state. The state found that the child's rights were violated, and then the state did nothing. And so the P&A sued the state, which I mean, that is the future. That is how we change things for our children. We can't just keep picking off individual kids. It really is the states that need to be sued, and said, you have a habit of, you're not enforcing the obligations of the LEA. You made an agreement with the federal government, state. That's your agreement. You own that. And they were able to, get some pretty significant recovery. But you're in a tough spot. Any way you cut it, you're in a tough spot. If the state is not making decisions based in law, in response to your complaints, or if the state is reaching a decision that your child's rights have been violated, but then failing to enforce your child's rights. I mean, that does kind of become, I mean, particularly when you have a state, I mean, I think that grassroots action is probably pretty effective where you have a case where the state has made a finding that there's a violation and then didn't force the school district to correct it. There's no wiggle room there. So that, that is a place where NPU obviously excels. But there's no way getting around the fact that we're all struggling with enforcement because there just aren't enough attorneys. They aren't accessible. They're too expensive. The state makes bad decisions. Hearing officers make bad decisions. We're in a bad spot.
And this in special education is one of those areas of need where there is a particular need to bridge the gap between organizing and access to law. And I'll tell you that from my own experiences, right? I've advocated and been known as a fierce advocate, and still have been in some ways violated when it comes to 504s and IEPs. And that's just a particular, I don't want to call it nefarious.
I would. I mean,
well, let's just call it
it's
that.
It's the violation of the rights of a protected and vulnerable class of people. That's nefarious in my mind.
And pathological. Okay, so we'll just, I'm gonna add that too. So, we do have to, as advocates, embrace that understanding that that's what it is, right? And come at it fiercely, because our children don't get another K-12 education.
That's right.
And you don't get a redo. Okay, listen to me, who's a grandma, right? Yeah. I mean, I have adult children. I don't get a redo. The path that they were on is the one that led them to where they're at now. And it's very important and vital that you, as new parents, even really recognize that early on and know that you have to go in this way. And it's not about hurting people's feelings or being friends with the people that are across the table. It is about getting what your child needs and utilizing the most effective way to do that. And sometimes these things do end up in court if you have access to lawyers. And sometimes it's unfortunate that the people that don't really need one. And so, this is why we do this show. Yeah. And I really appreciate you giving the time. So I have another question up, and it's from Christy. Are there special certifications, guidelines, requirements for language interpreters who provide language access in special education meetings?
I'm not aware of any law or anything contained in the idea. There might be state laws that address that. But I think the thing that you have to remember is that the law protects parental involvement. So if you're getting poor translation, then you're not able to be involved. And so the only way that I know of that you know whether you're getting appropriate translation is if you have somebody there who speaks both languages fluently. Because in the end, you really don't know. So if the IEP team meeting is in English and you speak Spanish, unless you've got somebody who's fluent in both languages, who is beholden to you alone, you aren't going to know whether your translation is appropriate or your interpretation is appropriate.
Right. And you know what, Christy, I know I've been in meetings like that, and you have too. That's why we're asking that question. I know that's why you're asking that, where it's not good services that are being rendered. And as a matter of fact, have a way of then violating the parents' rights to make informed decisions in a way that is undoable, right? Once you sign, you're like, okay, yeah, I agreed, but did you really fully agree? Did you have really informed consent when you sign that dotted line? And so that's, again, one of those nefarious types of practices. And definitely there is some information and resources regarding translation and interpretation services overall that the U.S. Department of Education has. I'll be putting that in the chat so that you can understand as parents your rights to have those translation interpretation services. That's the number one question I get, right? Like,
Interesting.
Parents go to board meetings or they go to IEP meetings 504 and somewhat understand that they're, you know, like if they have a partial knowledge of English but aren't, you know, able to articulate, they know like everything's not being stated here, right? And what a violation that is. You know, I'm sitting here at a table and I'm trying to communicate, and even though I don't speak English, doesn't mean that I'm dumb. You know what I mean? Just got to throw that out there. And so please don't play games with parents that way. But if they do, I'm going to put that information in the chat as well, you know, so that you can know what your rights are and how to advocate effectively for those services. Okay.
You know, if there's a 5-minute discussion and it's a 3-word interpretation, you know, there's a problem. I had a client who the language she was most fluent in was a really unusual dialect from Liberia. And it was extremely hard to find an interpreter in the US who wasn't related to her, who spoke that language, and it was a family matter. So it was even more of a challenge. And so she said, well, I speak Liberian English. We could do it in Liberian English instead of this more unusual dialect. And Liberian English is understandable by every person who speaks standard English. And so we were all sitting around the courtroom realizing that's not a good translation. So I have no doubt that that happens frequently.
All right, here's another question coming in hot from Texas. You know, we might have to set up some clinics in Texas over there and see what's going on. We have one complaint from Texas. A parent notified the school several times about her son being bullied. The school did nothing until she went to the media. Well, you know, that's power of the press. What is the student's rights if the school did nothing?
So this is a personal injury question, and I'm not a personal injury attorney. So you have you know, all these questions about bullying, unless it is, you know, unless it affects the child's disability, and then we have to adjust the child's disability related services, or it's because of the disability, and then we have a disability discrimination situation. But just plain bullying involves a different branch of law that varies from state to state, and I don't have expertise in it. So I don't know what to tell you really about bullying, to be honest with you.
And so I do want to take a moment to talk about that, just so that you know, you're aware there isn't really a federal rule about bullying per se, unless it overlaps with discrimination, right?
That's right.
So we want to talk about that. That's, you know.
Yeah. So I mean, the most of you, the law almost always sells us short, right? So you can make a complaint to OCR. That takes some time. When you're making a complaint, you really want to make sure you've got your proof down.
Yes.
So you're looking for the texts that your child is getting. You're looking for the emails you sent that say, because most of these agencies will not intervene in a he said, she said situation, even if the child is very much being bullied. So you've got to focus on how you're going to deliver proof to the agency. But an OCR complaint will take many months.
Yep.
And your child, you know, can't sustain that kind of trauma without being very seriously damaged. You can talk to a personal injury attorney. These are forms of, you know, of negligence, and a personal injury attorney who sues schools will have an understanding of what to do with bullying. So in Minnesota, you'll get a quicker turnaround from the State Department of Human Rights than you will OCR. So you can try your State Department of Human Rights as well. But again, you really, really have to deliver incontrovertible proof to the agency in order for the agency to take action. You've got to, make it very, very clear. So Christina's advice that you are communicating in writing is really important. You would talk, but you should follow up with I just want to record. We had a conversation. And in Minnesota, speaking of recording, it'll differ from state to state. So outside of Minnesota, I can't tell you how it is, but in Minnesota, you can, literally record with an audio recorder anybody you want. So only one person in the conversation has to know that the recording is happening. So you can record your oral conversations as well. That's proof also, as long as your state permits that sort of thing.
So I want to take this opportunity because I know that, Wendy, you said it was recorded and, until the parent went to the media. Well, you know what? We do exercise our First Amendment right to peaceably assemble and petition. But, and the petition part is important, right? Like, I know some people that show up to protest or peaceably assemble very well, yet don't petition anyone for anything, right? And so even if you verbalize your petition, send that into your local legislatures too, right? Like, here is why we are peaceably assembling ourselves and exercising our First Amendment right to petition. And if you have to petition your congressman, right? For more anti-bullying laws in Texas, this may be a good example of why they're necessary. Having that video, having, that pressure through the media. And so don't limit any avenue. But I do want to encourage people that as they're exercising their First Amendment right, to fully exercise that and petition and make sure that you do that in writing. So it doesn't become hearsay. I'm going to take this last question and then we're going to leave you with some admonitions, words of encouragement. Bernita says, make demands in writing. We can't emphasize enough, y'all. It has to be in writing. You have to have some evidence, some proof, right? That these things have a pattern to them, even a pattern history, maybe even when you're filling out this discrimination complaint. There's some blatant situations that take place, right? If a child gets their hair cut off at school, we're not going to go into that today. But y'all know how I feel about the Crown Act and different things like that. So, there's some blatant things that, like, if your child comes home a way that you didn't send them, their clothes are all ripped off and their hair is cut, we got a problem. That's a definite problem. But I think emotional damage can be the same, right? And so reach out, try to advocate with your legislator about that bullying. That's huge. It's going on everywhere. And a lot of times it's happening so fast that districts don't even know how to deal with it.
But remember, as you're advocating for laws, you have to advocate for ways that people can enforce their rights. So that's, there's got to be some. So for example, in Minnesota, we have anti-bullying legislation, but there's no method for enforcement.
Yes.
So I see there's another question. Do you want me to take it? It's a pretty good one.
This is the last question. And,
okay.
And I know that this one is going to be very triggering. I get this question a lot.
Right.
And I want to say before you answer it, parents, don't wait to the day of your manifestation determination review hearing to reach out for help. Okay. You're probably going to be a little bit too late for that. And you might not be able to get that hearing extended. It's not like you're at court and you're saying, hey, I need a continuation because of XYZ, right? They might end up having that hearing without you. So I'll go ahead and I'll pause right there and let Andrea, the expert, answer this question.
Well, you guys have done such a good job of asking me questions that happen to, trigger information that I very much want to give you. And so this question has done just the same. So the short answer is yes, your child can be suspended or expelled if they have an IEP. I have to confess that sometimes I conflate federal law with state law because I'm just a practitioner, right? So I know the law I need to get the kids in Minnesota what they need. So I'm going to try to make sure I'm limiting my discussion to federal law. So Oh, let's see. This is a big subject. So
Yes,
a
it is.
child, yeah. So a child who really what's happening when the child is threatened with suspension or expulsion, you're talking about a change of placement. So for children who possess certain kinds of drugs, and it's identified in the statute, or possess a handgun, well, a gun, which is also identified in statute, and it's broader, like a grenade will qualify also. So for children who have weapons, certain kind of weapons, and certain kinds of drugs, those children, whether there's a manifestation determination made in that child's favor or not, can be moved to an alternative educational placement temporarily for as many as, if I remember correctly, 45 school days. I don't have the law right in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
But accepting those matters, a manifestation determination meeting, the need for one occurs when the child has missed either 10 consecutive school days, or for disciplinary reasons, or 10 cumulative school days in a school year for sort of similar behavior. And the whole point of a manifestation determination meeting is to identify whether there's a relationship between the child's disability and the child's behavior. And the reason why that matters is we don't punish children for disability-related behaviors because that's discriminatory. But the most important thing I can tell you, I cannot stress this enough, is that you should never, and this is also why you're going to want to be working fast when your child is faced with expulsion in particular. You should never go to a manifestation determination meeting without a treating specialist. So, if your child is seeing a counselor, then your child's counselor must be a part of that meeting, even if they're Zooming or they're by phone. If your child is not seeing a therapist, find one immediately and make an appointment and go there and have that, explain the child's history and what kinds of diagnoses they've got and what kind of meds they're on and what the child has done. Because the school district will bring any kind of yahoo they can find, the school lunch lady, the school resource officer. I have seen that. They don't actually have the lunch lady come, but they do have the SRO come. People who have no experience or understanding of your child's disability will all line up and say, I don't think there's a relationship between the two. So you have to have somebody there who is the voice of authority, whose bona fides are greater than everyone else sitting at the table saying, I know this child, I have a PhD in psychology, and there's absolutely a relationship between the two. So you cannot expel a child for disability-related behavior. You can expel a child for disability-related behavior, but you still must provide them with special education, which sort of begs the question, have you really been suspended or expelled, right? So really what it means is they're entitled to make your home, right, your child's new educational setting, or the alternative educational site, where people are working for their GED or whatever. That's, that sort of change can occur for kids who don't have a significant relationship between their behavior and their disability. For kids, it's worth mentioning for Section 504, and I apologize, I haven't looked at this for a while, and it's not in front of me, but children on Section 504 plans also have some protection. Again, it's discriminatory to remove a child for disability-related behaviors. And there is it's identified in the regulations, and there is a right to an evaluation before the child has their placement changed under Section 504. And the reality is, I mean, in my experience, I don't know that I've ever been to a manifestation determination meeting where I wouldn't say, as an educated layperson, there's a relationship between the behavior and the disability. And so, I mean, that's oftentimes, frankly, evidence of a failing educational program, an unmet need. Think of all the kids we know who can't read, who are acting out behaviorally out of shame. A improper evaluation. The child has unmet needs we haven't identified. So the simple answer is yes, they can be removed, but only if there isn't I think the language is substantial relationship between their disability and the behavior that caused them to face expulsion.
Right. And so when those things come up, parents and families, I know that it can drive you into an emotional state of mind and being. Try to do the best you can, get your support team around you so that you are making rational and reasonable steps to advocate for your child. I know that a lot of these processes can make you really emotional, right? Yeah. Like, why are they doing this to my child, right? Like, that's the number one question that we face. And
because they're short on empathy.
Yes.
They're short empathy. They don't understand the law. They suffer from disability-related bias that they haven't recognized. They suffer from racial bias they haven't recognized. I've become a pretty salty cynic at this point.
Me too. So we're in the salty cynic.
In the salty cynic club, you and I.
And you're not alone. I mean, it's just I've seen it done badly for long enough, and I can't. I mean. Try to point out, well, where's the good parts of this, right?
I got no time.
And sometimes I come up with nothing. And so what the good part is that you, the parents and families, are the most credible source of information about your child and can effectively advocate for their needs as they matriculate through the K-12 education system. And we hope that this is helpful. We thank you all for watching. I want to leave with a final word. Thank you so much, Andrea. If you can tell people that are in your state how they can locate or, receive some help, maybe through the law clinic or some disability, right?
Yeah. It's a tough situation. There's one private attorney that I'm aware of, and my former colleague at the school law center, but she is, she's a market rate attorney, and that's challenging for most folks, frankly. Right. I mean, even people with money, it's, they're mortgaging their properties, and the truth is, we all know that when we have a child with significant needs, it does imperil our, ability to earn what we, would like to be earning. There's a disability law center. They do great work, but they don't have very many people. There are times when they haven't been able to provide any services, direct services, and our clinic has super limited capacity. They're working with students, and we're getting those kids through a kind of an identified chute. So here's my advice to you. Go to law school.
Yes.
Go to law school. If you got I have a GED. I never graduated from high school. I, had my own educational issues. I grew up in a house that was very chaotic. I got my GED. I went to college and I went to law school, and you can do it too. So go to law school is my advice to you, and go home and look at your kids' IEPs and look for those initial baselines. I think you're going to find that your goals and objectives and you want them in your goals and your objectives. I think you're going to find that they're missing.
I definitely encourage you to go to law school, right? Don't think it's ever too late, right? Here's Tabby. Great job, Tabby. I've been using study.com to help me with the law, right? And so every day you can learn something new. And so you're definitely, I would encourage you to be a part of the either decision makers as school board members or legislators.
Absolutely. Yes.
Why not you? Right?
Why not? Yes.
Or go to law school. We definitely need more lawyers in this space. And so I appreciate that. I'm going to give my guests the first opportunity to give a word of encouragement. And then, of course, our policy committee member here, Christy, the final one. And so I thank you again for your time. Thank you all those who are watching. Share this with another parent that you think it would be helpful with. And even if you don't share it, they might know someone that it can help, you know, and we just are here to continue to keep going. Every third Tuesday of the month, we will be offering this policy hour and ask a lawyer time. My crowd's over here saying thank you so much for your time. We want you guys to know, like, people volunteer their time to do this, and that's how serious we are to get you this information, and how passionate we are on this zealous pursuit. And so thanks for watching. You can give the word of encouragement goes to our parent guest first.
Which one is it? We're all parents.
Marin.
Sure. Well, my word of encouragement is, you know, we've been talking about advocating for individual kids, but you can also advocate on the policy level. So if you're interested in changing the laws, reach out to NPU, reach out to the other organizations, and those parent voices are really important on the policy level as well.
Yes.
That's my word of encouragement.
I'm excited about that too. I'm excited about all of it. Christy.
I am very grateful. You have no ideas. You, as parents, we never stop learning. As human beings, we never stop learning. I have a notepad here with like 4 or 5 pages of notes I've been taking, and I'm just eager to translate all of this and share it with my Spanish-speaking community here in Kansas City, Missouri. I am part of NPU's policy committee, and I remember when I joined the committee, I was like, I am clueless. I know nothing about this. I was scared, intimidated. And it's been through this process of learning and informing myself and attending webinars or conversations like this one that not only have I felt very empowered and empowered others along, but I have equipped myself with the necessary tools to advocate for my children and the children of others as well. And so I want to thank everyone and Christina also for making this possible as we share all of these resources, tips, access to experts like Andrea and Marin. Did I say it right? I'm trying to say it right. And how important it is to really advocate for our children, because a lot, you know, we tend to just think, oh, they're in school, things are fine, everything's going well. And it turns out that a lot of times it isn't. And so just thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, your experience with us parents. And to a word of encouragement to parents. Yes, we can become experts, not only in our children, but in all of the policies that affect them and impact them on their day-to-day. So thank you, everyone.
Andrea, do you have anything else that you would like to leave with? I
just want to give thanks for NPU. You know, I don't know a more powerful group of parent advocates, and I'm grateful that you're out there generating energy and creating resources. And so I'm just very, very impressed by the NPU and its members.
Thank you. And so my final word is, as a grandma, and I know you guys heard me say that a few times, and I mean it, right? Because grandparents are raising children too. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so I don't want to forget about all of the hard work, generational hard work that a lot of us are doing. And I want you to know, don't give up, right? Like, yeah. You know, I have a kindergarten granddaughter and a 5th grade grandson and 2 grandchildren that will be entering into the school one day. They're still toddlers right now. One's a brand new newborn, you know, like not even barely 2 months old. Wow. And so I just look forward to advocating for them. Yeah. But sometimes we get tired because we've been doing it generationally, right? Yeah. But I want you to know that your voices matter. The work that grandparents do in the community with grandchildren, with children, and with other people's children is totally necessary and totally needed and appreciated. And so to all of the grandparents out there, look at me, I'm still here. We're going to keep on pursuing educational learning justice. And I have elementary school children at the same time. So you know what that life's like, right?
Is that what keeps you so young looking? Is it the generational advocacy? Is that what?
You know, I think about, well, I wonder how my parents feel because they're great grands, you know? And so, look, we're going to stay in this fight as long as we can, and we're going to make sure that we touch as many lives as we can. And so I just wanted to just tell you don't give up. Keep doing what you can do. And if you need help, grandparents, you definitely join the National Parents Union. We're here for you too. And reach out to one of us. And so with that being said, you have been watching National Parents Union Policy Hour Ask a Lawyer. We'll be back on the third Tuesday of next month. Invite a friend. And we'll be here ready to answer your questions, ready to hear from you any day of the week. I'm Christina Laster, the Director of Policy and Legislation. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.